Okay, so with that, my friends, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to go forward and talk to you the best I can about this film, The Thing, in detail. And that will mean talking about specifics of the plot and the spoilers regarding the ending and the like. So if you have not seen The Thing, please turn off this video, and if you are okay with watching horror films, intense films, I cannot recommend this film strongly enough. I think, again, it's not for everyone. It is quite a gross film. It is an intense film. And so if you're not into horror films or that sort of thing, probably not for you. So you don't need to watch it if you don't like that sort of thing. But if you are into that sort of thing, or you are okay with horror films that have quite a certain degree of in-your-face scenes, then I think this is one to watch, and so I strongly recommend this film to you. And once you have seen this film, my friend, you can come back and watch this video or these videos. They will all be up here, and at that point, my friends, it will be my pleasure, my distinct pleasure, of hearing your thoughts and comments about what you think and how you reacted to the John Carpenter masterpiece, The Thing. Okay, so you are back, which means you have seen The Thing and you don't mind talking about details of this film. So I have to preface my comments, like I did earlier, by saying that I am not at all professing to be any kind of expert in the field of thing studies. I don't think that I am in any way capable of knowing all the little nitty-gritty details. There are so many other great resources out there that discuss the theories of the thing, who is the thing at which time, what could have happened to certain characters of the thing, etc. They do this much, much better than I. So what I will probably be discussing will not be reaching the same levels of greatness as those theory discussions are. So again, this isn't meant to be a cumulative or comprehensive discussion of the thing, but I do want to talk about how I have reacted to this film, certain observations that I have made, and things that I am thinking about or have thought about with respect to this film, and hopefully also get some feedback from you. And as always, you are free to leave comments under these videos in the comment section at any time, because I know you have so many great things to say about this remarkable film, The Thing. And so where do we begin with this great film? Because I think there are so many places that we can start, but I suppose one place that we can begin is well, gosh, there are so many places to begin, I suppose, but let's start with its general approach, and hopefully we can get into some detail as we go along. So the general approach, I think, of this film, The Thing, is multifaceted, which I find at once so characteristic of John Carpenter's filmography style. If we remember John Carpenter's filmography up to now, Dark Star, Assault on Precinct 13, Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, also Someone's Watching Me, Elvis, the like. We have a director, a filmmaker, who has really created a varied and wide-ranging work, filmography. And I think that makes him, in terms of a filmmaker now at this stage, at least potentially so anyway, a filmmaker that has many different ways of expressing himself. And I think that is certainly on display here with The Thing, because the way this film presents its story, the way this film presents information, it is presenting it in terms not just as a kind of splatterfest. It's not just in terms of a deep-rooted mystery thriller. It's not just in terms of a cold suspense, who do you trust type of thriller. It's not just in the terms of a genre action film with typical genre beats. It is all of these combined to create an ultimate experience in horror, terror, suspense, and real thought about who to trust, who to believe. And I find that to be a real, it's one of those key human dilemmas about relationships, about understanding the other, and about how do we understand, if we don't understand the other, how can we understand ourselves? Those sorts of questions that are quite elemental to human existence. And so I find that this film is creating a huge tapestry of ways to present information to us, its audience. And so I find this film to be multifaceted in its approach, and it's attacking us, bombarding us with all sorts of things from all directions, which I find great. One of those directions, of course, is the gross out effects. Now, what's amazing about this film is I think this is one of the grossest films in terms of its practical special effects. And I find that it is almost one of those films that it just does things with its special effects that I think even now it is so they are like doing things that are just genius level. A lot is made of the craft of Rob Bottin and his crew in creating some of these really state-of-the-art scenes. Mostly done by him, although there's one key scene that I understand was handled primarily by Stan Winston. But there are some great set pieces here. There are the dog thing transformation scenes, which are just out of this world. There are also prior to that, there are the real eerie things with the sort of the they're not dead yet, but there are what Macready and Copper find at the Norwegian site with the twisted faces and the like, and that huge thing there. But as Blair finds out from doing his autopsy, the innards are human organs. And so you have this huge thing that is already on display early on. Not to mention the fact that there are other aspects there. You see just some real gross stuff in the Norwegian site. And so this is all thanks to Rob Bottin and his crew. And then you get the dog thing transformation stuff, and you get all that grotesque. It's gross and it's beautiful and it's mind-boggling and it defies expectation and is chaotic, and there is no rhyme or reason to it. It's amorphous in terms of its structure, and it just boggles the mind every time I see it. And there is no there doesn't seem to be any sense of logic with respect to the anatomy of the stuff that's being presented. And this is true for, as I say, the dog thing. This is also true for the Norris thing, when that spectacular scene happens with Norris and the defibrillator and the chest opening and the gnawing off of the arms of Dr. Copper. And then the stuff comes out of the chest, right? That is one of the most famous scenes in all of horror cinema. And it's one of the grandest jump scares of any film that I have ever seen. And I just marvel, even to this day, I marvel at how effective that scene is. It just comes out of nowhere, and it just explodes just quite freakishly into this unbelievable sight, and I can't believe what I'm seeing. And it doesn't end there. What I love about that scene, and this is exemplary of what I love about the Thing effects, is that it just keeps on going and it doesn't stop. You think that there would be a limit to the logic of how things are constructed, but oh no, there are no limits, because not I mean, not only do we get the stuff coming out of, not only do we get the chest bursting, not only do we get the stuff coming out of the chest, not only do we get the stuff, the tentacles and the spew and the spray coming out, and then we get the now different mutation version of the Norse thing, which is sort of a lopsided spider-like creature that is clinging to the ceiling there, with the head that is now a mutated version of his face with the teeth and all. But also we get at the same time the actual head, not actual, but the head of the Norse body trying to rip itself apart from the body, which is now being subject to the flames of the flamethrowers of the people there, and it's becoming the thing, and it becomes very famously upside down spider head that walks away, right? According to Palmer, right? You've got to be effing kidding. So this is the great example of how the thing monsters, when they are depicted here, they are so gross in your face, but they also defy expectation. They seem to defy logic. There's no rhyme or reason in terms of their anatomy, and they just won't stop. Things are ripped off, and they are turning into new things before our very eyes. And even every time I see it, I still cannot I cannot, oh gosh, I get such a thrill and trying to figure out exactly what's going on, and I seem to see new things every time. You know, I go back to the dog thing, and when the thing turns into this huge blob, and you see the eyeball there, and it blinks, I think, and it suddenly bursts open, and you see the thing, the petal thing that comes out, and it tries to attack Child before Child's torches it with the flamethrower there. And those little details, and apparently those are made up of dog tongues and little teeth there. It looks like a flower that's opening up, but it's actually much more sinister than that, etc. And the thing too with Norse, I love the detail how the Norse head comes off, and and the tongue whips out, and it attaches itself, and it tries to get its bearings. We never see the Norse head upright. Now, the only time we see the Norse head upright is when it's actually, its tongue is going like this, and it's trying to rip itself from the body with the green and yellow goo spewing out and stuff. But we always see it either sideways or upside down, which I think adds to the horrifying effect, which is, of course, augmented by the fact that legs and eyeball sprockets seem to grow out of its head in that wonderful, iconic silhouette shot lit from behind. It's one of the most iconic shots of all of horror, I would say. And then there is the Palmer transformation, which is, I think, different in tone, but it feels like it has a different style in terms of what it's trying to do. There are no greens or yellows. There's just blacks and browns and reds, deep reds, and a lot of bladder effects and just bleeding and tentacles and things like that turn into this huge thing that then wraps its tongue around windows and who then tries to devour windows in a very, very shocking and I think tragic scene, and then the like. Not to mention, of course, the early Norwegian camp thing that was covered up, and then the goo started to run down, and we understand that this was part of the thing that attacked Bennings, and then we see Bennings with his arms not quite assimilated into full human form yet, and so and then of course he screams, which is very much like a scream that we've seen in a different horror film called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's really quite a chilling effect. And then we have the Blair thing, which is, I think, a different kind of horror. It feels like a huge mock-up mechanical thing in terms of Blair's head on one side and also teeth on the other side. It also appears in some shots to be an animated puppet kind of thing, or not a puppet, but an animated model, and so a stop-motion animation. When it breaks through the ground there in the underground portion of the base at the climax of the film, and it grabs the dynamite charger, and it also grabs some of the bottles, the Molotov cocktail bottles, etc. So there are some, and it breaks open and we see a mutated version of the dog, etc. Just before MacReady does his little roll and does the final, I don't want to say it because it's he says, and F you too, right? And just throws a piece of dynamite and it just explodes. And we hear the scream, which is supposed to suggest the death of Blair Thing. But these, I think, are so in your face and so amorphous, and they defy expectation, and they are so different in approach that it's almost impossible for me to fully comprehend the precise anatomical makeup of these monsters as they appear, which I think makes the film quite fresh because it feels so inventive every time, and it's so complicated that it's one of those films where you can watch it many times and still discover something new in terms of these little details, and you can stop, freeze, pause the image, and you can try to figure out what's going on here. I think the concept is that the thing, the monster, has been imitating so many different life forms throughout its existence, and these are life forms that are not just on Earth but also elsewhere on other worlds. And so the way in which it seems to be presenting itself to the crew and to us might be suggestive of all the other different life forms that it has imitated over the course of its existence. So that is probably a reason why it has certain forms that are alien to what we understand humanoid forms to look like, because these aren't humanoids. They are far from that. And so I think with that basis, in terms of one's imagination, the sky's the limit. And so that is a great aspect of this film, and it's one of its strengths, because it not only provides an amorphous terror horror monster, but it also provides freshness. It also presents a kind of mystery element because we don't know what's going to happen. It also ups the ante in terms of the scare factor because it makes, therefore, every little bit of the thing a threat, a menace. One of the things that I'm going to talk about later is when they do the blood test. When Palmer's blood is tested, that's when the blood reacts in that wonderful jump scare moment, and then MacReady drops the petri dish which contains Palmer's blood. We realize now Palmer is a thing. We see a shot of the blood run away, which is to suggest that even the blood, even when separate from Palmer's body, it is still itself a living organism because it is the thing that has assimilated Palmer's blood, but it's still alive. We never see shots of the blood being taken care of, but it just runs away. So that actually adds a real horror element, and it doesn't make us feel easy, because even after we think that the MacReady and the crew have taken care of all the assimilated things, we still are uneasy because we realize, or maybe we think in the back of our minds, hey, wait a minute, if a little speck of blood can get onto them and assimilate them, then they're really still in a lot of trouble, because have they really accounted for all the little bits of the organism that might have flown about here and there, right? They didn't take any precautions in terms of quarantine. They didn't take any precautions in terms of masking themselves when they examined the bodies and autopsies and all that stuff. Heck, remember that bit when they're doing the blood test, right? And we understand that the way in which they drew everyone's blood is through a scalpel, and they cut the fingers of all the people there. And then when it comes time for Windows to draw his own blood, what does he do with the scalpel? He takes the scalpel after he has cut the finger of Knowles and drawn his blood. He then takes that same scalpel and then just goes like that, flicks it off of his jeans, and then cuts his own finger. So he uses the same, we understand, therefore, he used the same scalpel to cut the fingers of all the people to draw the blood. So, and then he just cleaned it by just flicking it off of his jeans, which is actually quite a frightening thing, because it really goes to this notion of infection. And also, if we understand that even a little speck of blood could be enough to infect someone, then, oh gosh, no one is safe. No one is safe, and we don't see any ways in which the crew are really taking these microscopic level precautions. And so They are quite nonchalant when it comes to quarantine. And I think they understand the futility of it by this point. But my point is that even the smallest speck can be a threat. And so I think we are never at ease. Even when we think we are at ease, we are never at ease because of the world and the physics that this monster inhabits and presents to us, that the information that we have been provided by these great grand monster effects is really providing also a real horrifying sense of the broadness of the physics of this monster. In other words, the physics of this monster is such that it can operate in a way that it can infect based on just a single microbe of its existence. So even a tiny speck of it can be a threat. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So this is the presentation, one aspect of the presentation of the horror element, which is the direct, in-your-face, gross-out visual monster effects of this. But also, another way that this film presents itself is through its suspense element. And this is generated by the, as I say, the fact that the thing, the monster, operates on a very microscopic level. Also, the film is so clever in that most of the assimilation scenes that we see are done off camera. The only exception, I think, is, of course, we see the monster exposed. So those are the scenes that we see, but those aren't, and we only see two, I think, just very few instances where we see some kind of assimilation or absorption of the thing of another human being or something. So the first part is when we see the goo drip from the Norwegian sight thing, and with the stretched out double face, and right, remember when Bennings and Windows dragged what they think to be the dead carcass of this into one of the rooms, and they asked MacReady to take his stuff out of the room and go elsewhere. And that's when Fuchs meets MacReady, and Fuchs asks to talk to MacReady by himself, and they go into one of they go outside and talk about Blair and all that stuff. And then Fuchs reads Blair's manuals and says, they are not dead yet. There's still cellular activity in this stuff. And that sets off alarm bells in MacReady's mind, which is just in time, because this is when we see, in fact, there is still activity with this Norwegian thing, and the goo drips down. And then the next thing we see is Windows walking in, and we understand that he has the keys from Gary, which is a very key point. And he looks and he sees the clothing, which we assume to be the clothing of Bennings, which has been all bloodied up, torn, and then he turns and he sees tentacles or something wrapped around this gooified body of Bennings. And so we understand this to be part of the thing in mid-assimilation process, as it were, with respect to Bennings. We didn't get him in time because they realized that Bennings was a thing, and they managed to take care of him at the time. But that's one example. And then another example is much later in the film, towards the climax, when we see Gary and Knowles and MacReady trying to make the final preparations for the explosion of the base, because they know that Blair is now a thing, and that he wants to they want to try to kill the thing before the thing can carry out its plans of deep freezing the whole place in order to have it hibernate for the until a rescue crew comes and finds them in the near future. So they're setting up all the dynamite charges and everything, and then Gary's light on his helmet seems to be faulty, so he takes it off, tries to fiddle with it, and suddenly from behind him, another great jump scare. Blair comes in, and he does this thing with the mouth of and the face of Gary, and he sticks his fingers through there, which is a really gross thing in terms of its pure uncomfortable invasiveness. But then we see another shot of what we assume to be Blair, and now his whole face is now enveloped and fused with Gary's face, and he drags off Gary's body. And so this we understand to be not necessarily assimilation, because we don't necessarily see Gary being assimilated into a Gary thing, but we understand that perhaps this meant that the Blair thing was somehow absorbing Gary into his own body somehow. I'm not sure. But these are the only two instances, I think, that we see some kind of activity of the thing attacking someone else. But we never see, and then also we see, I think, also the dog when it turns into the thing and it's attacking another dog by doing the thing with the spray on one of the dogs, and it also has its tentacles wrapped around another dog, which MacReady, I think, shoots, much to the great dismay of Clark, of course. But I think those are the only examples of where we see the thing actually in the process of trying to assimilate another living thing. But that is to say, therefore, that for the most part, all the assimilations of the thing of the other characters is done off camera or off screen. We never see it. We see assumptions of it. We get feelings of perhaps something might be going on. There's a very famous example early on in the film where we see the dog, who's played by, the dog's real name was Jed, and was a great moment. It's one of the great acting moments in this film by the dog, who was, I understand, to be part wolf. But it's a famous scene where early on we see the dog going down a corridor, opening a door, going down a corridor, looking to, it must be screen left, into one room, and then walking towards the camera to another door, and this time on the right, screen right, and looking in, and we see the dog is looking into a room which has apparently a person there. We can only see the person by the silhouette that's cast on the wall, but apparently there's a little bit of curliness to this person's hair. We don't know exactly who it is, but the dog enters, and we see that person turn, which we assume means that the person in the room notices the dog entering, and then there's a famous fade to black. One of the great fades to black by editor Todd Ramsey, which I want to get into later. But we can probably assume that this might be one of the moments that the dog, which is a thing, assimilated one of the crew members. Based on the way in which the silhouette looks, there are some people on the crew who don't have hair, Childs, Bennings, but the silhouette is obviously someone who has hair, so we can think that who has that kind of hairy look. Probably it's Norris, could be Windows, I'm not sure, but I think it's probably Norris in terms of the way it looks. But of course there's room for interpretation for that, and room for argument there as well. But my point is that is a very famous scene, which, if we can assume it's an assimilation scene, which I think is a different question also, then that's another example of an assimilation that's done off screen. Of course, we know by the blood test, we know that there were, at least also prior to the blood test, we know that Norris was a thing and Palmer was a thing, and also we understand that Blair was a thing. So we know this for a fact, that these three characters were things. They were assimilated. And so there must have been a point when these characters had been assimilated by the thing at one point. We never see it, and therefore we have to assume, or we have to guess when it happened, which is brilliant. This is brilliant because instead of showing us the precise moment when these characters became things, all we are given are the end results, namely their being exposed as being things at their point of exposure, right? Palmer at the blood test scene, Norris with the famous chest opening scene, and also Blair with the climax. We never see any direct indication prior to these scenes of them being things. There are indications, there might be things that we can see that might be discerned as to mean clues, as to patterns of behavior, etc. But in terms of direct information presented to us, we never see their transformations occur, their assimilations occur on screen. Everything is off screen, which is a brilliant choice because this ups the ante in terms of the mystery element. It also makes the film utterly rewatchable and rewatchable and rewatchable. Why do I say this? Because when we know, after we see the film for the first time, that surprise kicks in. Oh my gosh, Norris was a thing. Oh my gosh, Palmer was a thing. And, those sorts of surprises kick in. After we have that knowledge, then we go back and watch the film, and then we can try to figure out at what point could they have become the thing? At what point could Parker, could he have become the thing? At what point Norris could he have become the thing? At what point Blair could he have become the thing? I'm sorry, not what did I say? Parker. I meant Palmer. At what point could Palmer have become a thing? At what point could Norris have become the thing? At what point could Blair have become the thing? So all these considerations are just really at the fore of this. And so I find, therefore, this film to, because it doesn't show information, that in itself makes it so rewatchable, because we are then tuned into trying to find all the clues as to what happened to who, when, exactly how, all this stuff. That's exactly that's one of the great ways to create longevity in a film, and to create a sustainable film that can last for ages. Not also it adds to the suspense element and the mystery element of the film, the thing. So that's one way of it presents information. On the one hand, with its gross side effects, it's in your face and it's direct, and then on the other hand, with its assimilation and the plot elements there, it is withheld and it holds back information. I find that contrast to be utterly fascinating.